and it's also marred by systemic failure. And a lot of people say that that questions three fundamental aspects of democracy, which is the integrity of the ballot, the rule of law, and press freedom. And they say that if the integrity of the ballot can be questioned, then there's a problem with our democracy. And this morning we're looking at getting our democratic process right. And to help us have this conversation, we have Felix Morka. He's Executive Director of Social and Economic Rights Action Center, SERAC. Many thanks for coming on the program.
Thank you.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning. How are you?
All right, let's start you off with that report. I'm very sure you're conversant with the EU's report on Nigeria's election and saying that that election wasn't transparent, and then it was also marred by systemic failure. We talked about the NBC, talked about the press, talked about the court, and people say, look, this actually questions the integrity of the ballot, the rule of law, and then press freedom. I want to get your thoughts on that report and what it means for our democracy right now.
Thank you very much. Well, yes, the EU has come out with its report. In Delta, I was very familiar with the work they did, observing the elections. Now, but I don't think we needed the EU to tell us that all wasn't well with the elections we conducted this last time. The same way that 2015 went down, and the elections before that. But I think what is striking is that, between 1999 and today, we have not moved, a lot away from this same kind of remarks or observations about our electoral process. We have been stuck. If you look at the reviews of the elections of 2015 and the one before that, they are not, markedly different. So these are things that have become recurrent in our experience of elections, which is also very disturbing. Because, a democracy has two dimensions. One is the process, aspects of democracy, which is what we're discussing. The periodic elections and voting where those who govern are selected by, citizens. But you also have the substantive aspects of democracy. But, we are, and usually, typically, in many democracies, the process side is what people actually get right the most, because it's the easiest part to organize an election. People come out to vote, they vote and they leave, and then the votes are counted. But here, it's an enormous challenge that we see within our own system. Because, those who are entrusted with the task of managing the process don't necessarily, see it as, a service to society. They bring in all of the same, problems, the same, incapacities, the same, very short-sightedness into the job of, managing an electoral process. Because often, everything is done at the last minute. You don't have the sort of preparation that, other jurisdictions, put in to ensure that at the time the elections are conducted, people have taken care of the basics, whether it's the ballot papers, whether it's the, venues, the logistics to move, things, materials from one point to the other, adequate security. We take those things for granted because we become accustomed to this sort of standard, and I think that's really, really tragic.
But if you say that we haven't done well since 1999 in the electoral process, are you also saying that we haven't done well in a democratic process also? Does that also speak for that?
We are struggling with our democracy. There's no question. Now, as a veteran, human rights and pro-democracy lawyer who was involved in the fight to push the military out of government, I'm excited by what we have accomplished since 1999. The fact that during this period we've managed to maintain our electoral system without interference by the military. That's by itself is we take it for granted, but it wasn't so. So that alone, the fact that we still can elect our own governments, to me is remarkable. But having said that, when you look at some of the indicators for consolidating democracy, we are still struggling. That's my point. That you talked about the integrity of the voting. When you conduct an election and the integrity of that process is not assured, then there's a problem. Because at the end of the day, the outcome will not be that which will help consolidate the idea of democracy and give citizens the sense that their votes actually matter. And until citizens feel like when they vote, their votes count, and that it helps to give authority, mandate, and legitimacy to those who are elected, then you don't quite have the kind of democracy that we desire. So it's important that the integrity of elections, are maintained, guaranteed by, proper, fair conduct by those who are tasked with the job of, managing elections. INEC, for example. All of the allegations you see, all of the claims and false claims, whether it's the real news or the fake news about what was done or what wasn't done by INEC. We don't even have the capacity to tell what is real and what is not. And in this age of social media, everybody is a journalist, everybody is an author, everybody is a speaker, everybody is an analyst. So people have multiple sources of information. And so sometimes you don't even know what to believe anymore. So the point is that, those who are responsible for these systems must understand that they are called upon to render, very important service to this country, without which, as a people, we can't really move forward. Because, unless you get that process side of democracy right, the substantive dimension of democracy, you can't even touch. Meaning, for instance, what people generally call the dividends of democracy, which that term I don't quite, like, but that's what.
What would you rather call it?
I think it's just, the benefits of, good governance. Because, when you say dividends of democracy, it's as if, dividends is more an economic business, language that talks about, your investment and, what you hope to get in return. But the values of democracy and the benefits of, a democratic system transcend just that. It's about your, a vision of society, how you actually imagine your society, to be. It's a vision of the good life. It's beyond just what you get. Because when people talk about dividends of democracy, they talk about, how much money am I getting from the system and all. It's not that mundane. It's also about existential necessities without which you can't really aspire to the good life. And the good life is more than just the money in your pocket. Good life is the fact that you can leave your house and go to the next street at 9 p.m. and not be afraid that you're going to get attacked or kidnapped or raped or murdered. That's a good life. So any system that guarantees security will allow individuals to aspire to their best potential, will allow people to pursue their dreams and earn their own money, earn their own income, and make a living for themselves without interfering with the rights or enjoyment of others in society.
Okay, let's look at 20 years of uninterrupted democracy in Nigeria. Would you say at this point in time, our democracy has been deepening or degrading? I'm an eternal optimist, so I would say that our democracy is deepening. I say that because the consciousness of our people about our democracy is growing. More people have become aware of some of the challenges, some of the issues that play in our democracy. More people are more engaged now to express themselves. In the past, at the turn of 1999, it used to be that citizens were more interested in adopting what I would call conventional wisdom, to be silent even in the face of enormous, brutal actions by the government. But I don't think that they are anymore. Because I think social media has helped to embolden people. You can sit in the comfort of your bedroom and make comments that people in high places will, listen to, or at least will hear, even if they don't, work with what you're saying. But people are able to express themselves. And I think the leaders, those who govern, are no longer able to totally insulate themselves from the opinions of Nigerians. So from that perspective alone, I think that, we're making progress. But that energy is about, consciousness, about awareness. But I think that we need to elevate it a little bit to a level where that, awareness transforms into, concerted action by citizens to demand that things are done and done, the way they ought to be. Because, quite frankly, I think one of the problems we often, when we talk about democracy, we look at leadership and what they have done or what they have failed to do. But, it's also about the citizens of this country. What they too must do in a democracy in order for that democracy to be viable, to be sustainable, and for it to actually deliver on the expectations of a democracy. Meaning that we must demand more from our government. I don't mean the whole idea of
screaming and shouting and cussing at leaders and making noise and all that. We need to rebuild our strategic, civil society institutions, labor movements, our professional associations. We need to, I think, sort of diminish the terrible impact of political patronage on these, systems of civil society. Because unless our awareness is translated into, active social and political consciousness that leads to, action, we are not likely to move, further than we are today. So my suggestion is that, for us to get to where we need to be, it's a two-way, thing. The government must do its part. The people must also do their part. For example, this is when the first 100 days of this, new administration. You would think that by now, some major decisions about constituting government would have been made. But fine, I'm willing to grant 100 days. But my hope is that within the next 100 days of this administration, from May 29th, that we will see a constitution of the cabinet of this government, so that those who are, given the responsibility, the public trust to head those institutions, will swing into action and bring deliberate speed into, the thinking about, what these ministries and departments of government must do in their respective, areas to actually begin to, give, expression to the intent and the will of this government to move the country to the next level as they have, decided. We all want to see that effort. So we must see some speed in the way that this government, gets itself going. I am very optimistic that a lot of lessons have been learned in the last 4 years of this government, and hoping that, those lessons will be injected into the, process of arranging the next 4 years of the government.
Right, Mr. Morka, a lot of people will agree with you on what you said about, democracy being a two-way thing. There is a part for the government and a part for the citizens, but there are a lot of people who also say that, look, when it comes to speaking truth to power and holding government accountable, it's a conundrum that is going to be quite difficult to fix. Because we have citizens who people believe have been battered to the point where they've become apathetic. We have CSOs that have become like tools in the hand of the government. And then we have human rights activists that have become political appointees. So there is nobody really speaking to power. And I just want you to speak on that issue.
No, we're here having a conversation. I don't think that we have any concern that the police is going to burst into the studio and disrupt this discussion. There was a time when you couldn't have a free conversation about anything in this country. The point I'm making is that, Nigerians have the freedom to speak truth to power. I'm, an activist, a human rights lawyer, and I've been speaking, my entire professional life, which spans quite some time. My point is that those who mean to can do so. But we must also be discerning about how we do that. Because speaking truth to power is important in any democracy, without which you can't really have a democracy. You can't have a democracy where those who govern exercise, just mindless authority to do whatever it is they want without any sort of, recourse to the Constitution and what it prescribes in terms of the, rights of citizens and the limits of, government authority. You can have that. But I agree with you that many of our institutions of civil society have become heavily dulled by our experience of democracy. Many have been co-opted. Others have resigned to accepting that, we have a democracy now, and there's no reason, we don't have any sort of compelling reason to be as vocal as we used to be, or to be as critical as we used to be. But all that is wrong. As a matter of fact, in the democracy, the need, the imperative to be vocal in, a critique of government is even more important, because you have this interface of legitimacy. Those who are elected, the government is elected by the people, so we must, assume, because we did have an election and people voted. Whatever you think of the integrity of the voting process, someone was elected. So you can't completely cast that entire process away. But having said that, you have people then who say, you know what, well, the governor has a mandate of the people. So whatever he does, they assume that that mandate must excuse him from scrutiny. But that's a wrong, perception. It's the wrong way to think about
But
it.
Mr. Morka, do you agree then
Yes.
that the question is not how the message is passed, but who? That we have a problem of who and not a problem of how. We're looking for who is going to lead the way in terms of holding government accountable, who has integrity to do that, who has not been bought over. It's not about how people say it, but about who is going to say it.
No, I'm not sure. The who is important. The who is important. Who is speaking? You want to, okay, you know what, who is that? Is that Peter? You listen. Is that, Martha? You listen. Somebody else maybe, named and you turn off because you think they're compromised. But remember that the issue of, moral authority to speak for a people or to speak your own thoughts and express yourself to government is inherent. And the reason you may think that Peter is not a credible speaker may also be very subjective. Sometimes is a fiction. You just assume he's been bought over because yesterday he said something that appeared to be in support of somebody in government. Critique is not all about condemnation. It's not all about pointing out what is going wrong. Sometimes you critique by affirmation. So it's a double process, it's a simultaneous process of critique and affirm. When I see something that the government has done and they've done wrong, right, even when that person is, politically opposed to my own viewpoints, I am willing and happy to, affirm that they've done something right. Because, by doing so, you give them an incentive to do, better. But I think that it's not really about the who. I think it's about all of us. Because, sometimes when people speak, they try to articulate the viewpoints of many, the silent majority, the things they know people are struggling with, dealing with, thinking, but somebody comes out to actually put it in clear terms because they have access. I mean, it's not every Nigerian, the people who live in this area, it's not everybody who walks into this studio to express themselves. Even the studio itself will not avail its platform to just about any Nigerian to come in and say something. So that already is a very narrow process of selection of those whose opinions are given vent and expression in the public space. But the point I'm making is that every Nigerian should speak out. Whether it's in your neighborhood meeting, you speak out. Whether it's in your ward meeting, if you're a politician or if you're a member of a political party, you speak out. Anywhere you are in your market association, you speak out. Because what you see as public policy must sometimes be the aggregate of all of this, collective expressions. So my point is that we as Nigerians must learn to be more constructive. Again, I must distinguish between public, discourse and just what I call just grumbling. Nigerians like to grumble. They don't really come out to speak and articulate their concerns. People speak in their mouth and they walk away. That never has impact. What has impact is when you find a platform in your neighborhood. And by the way, I'm one of those Nigerians who thinks that every Nigerian should be a member of a political party. I don't care what party it is. Be a member of a political party. Because, we're here discussing our democracy and our elections. But actually, our election is the last stage. And in my view, even the less important stage of our democratic, process. The most important phase to me is the phase at which political parties make those decisions that actually throw up the candidates who eventually run, for office. Now, my favorite example is that if you have two political parties and in the process of primaries and all of the pre-primary, politicking, that throws up somebody who is hopelessly corrupt, or say, even somebody who was known to be perhaps a retired, armed robber, just because he has money and he has, audacity, and he comes out and he's able to, manipulate his way to getting ticket of the party. That's party A. And in party B, you get one ruthless, rebel, some terrorist, some, rascal who has no respect for, human life and dignity, who also is able to, bulldoze his way in party B and get, a ticket. Now, if those are the two candidates you have, you are already messed up. I don't care what the EU would say about that election. Even if the election were free and fair, I assure you that the quality of governance that we follow is unlikely to meet the expectations of a democratic system. But many Nigerians are not participants in the making of the decisions about who actually competes. That's why in mature democracies, you find that people don't really worry whether it's, say in the US, for example, whether the candidate of the Republican Party wins or that of the Democratic Party wins. Because, in all, there are systems in place, some really rigorous vetting systems that, prevents the worst, if you will, of the aspirants from emerging as candidates. Because once they're candidates of the party, one of them will win, inevitably. So, it's important that we also focus on that, basic, stages of building those who govern. Because if we don't do that, so when you're at home and the chairman of a party in your ward is some, rascal, or somebody who doesn't really care, who's just interested in their own personal, satisfaction, and you are the professor, and you're in that neighborhood, and that man is the chairman of the party, the other one is the secretary of the party, and at the end of the day, you come on TV to analyze how, the candidates don't meet the quality that you expect. Where were you when that decision was being made? Right. So I think it's also very important to focus on.
Okay, we'll say having this conversation, getting our democracy right. We'd also like to inform you, our viewers, that our phone lines are open for you to call in. And let's also get your contribution of what we're discussing this morning. We have Mr. Felix Morka with us right here in the studio, and we're discussing everything that has to do with democracy, and then looking at ways at which we can get them right. Now, you made mention of system. Now, I'd like to ask you, what kind of democratic system do we need to start having in our nation to get our democracy right?
Well, I think of democracy, as a functioning system, as a system that actually is alive and a response to the needs of people. For instance, we cannot truly have a democracy in Nigeria with the level of insecurity that we have, around this country. Insecurity on so many levels, on state levels, on township levels, on just neighborhood levels, where you cannot even leave your home and get to work without the fear of getting kidnapped by some bandit or some thug or some a terrorist for whatever purpose or reason. You can't have a democracy where the inequality of income is so stark that maybe about 1,000 people in this country own over 80% of the wealth of this country, a country of nearly 200 million people. There's no excuse for that. That's a contradiction, of what a democracy ought to be. You cannot have a true functional democracy when people are, just totally jobless, and a lot of youth are out there without a means of livelihood. You can't have a democracy in a country where a decision or decisions are made not on the basis of what is at stake, but on the basis of who is involved or who you know. You can't have a democracy that is functional like that. You can't have a democracy in a place where governments, or those who serve in government have such terrible attitude, where they see themselves as gods, as thing gods, where they see the people they're supposed to serve as just irritants, nuisance, and people who ought to be mistreated. That's not a democracy. So it's really about service. We need to come back to the original idea of governance and the whole Greek history or origins of democracy. It was about people. It was about the well-being of the people. That ought to be the essence of government. A democracy that cannot guarantee the well-being of its own people is not a true flourishing democracy. So my thinking is that there are many things that we need to figure out.
from security to the economy of this country. We need to fix it. And there's no better way to fix it than to entrust the management of our key, sectors of this country, our national security, the economy, perhaps our foreign relations, to the very best people. The idea that you make selections of those who manage these important critical portfolios on the basis of political patronage is completely antithetical to a democracy. Because, you cannot play, the game of, chess with that. These are life and death portfolios. So the government must go out to find the very best people to manage, these sectors. Because the president is the president. You can't be the president and also be the minister of the economy. Or be the, the national security advisor. You can't. You must, no matter how smart the president is, no matter how well-meaning the president is, the president also needs the very best people in some strategic positions. I understand we're in a democracy, political patronage cannot be completely ruled out. But there are some portfolios that ought to be completely, sort of immune to political patronage, where the decisions about who takes those jobs must be all about, competence and, capacity.
All right, competence and capacity, but we'll have to take a break now on that very point. And when we return, we'll have more on this conversation with Mr. Felix Morka. Do stay with us.
Superscreen television is now on Star Times, channel 173. Now our tentacles are extended to give you the very best of sports, news, entertainment shows, current affairs, blockbuster movies, and lots more. Tune in to Star Times, channel 173, and enjoy the very best of Superscreen television. Now you're talking.
SUPERDAWN, your daily live current affairs program where topical issues that border on politics, economy, sport, and sizzling national issues are analyzed, now holds every Monday to Friday, 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. on Superscreen television. Let your voice be heard. Join us.
Thanks for staying with us on the program. We're still speaking with Mr. Felix Morka, who is the Executive Director of Social and Economic Rights Action Center, SERAC. We've been talking about getting our democratic process right in Nigeria. We know that there have been a lot of complaints when you ask people, what do you think? Do you enjoy democracy in Nigeria? They say no, but do you want democracy to continue? They say yes. And you say why? You say because of the freedom of speech. So it looks like the only benefit people have in the democracy is freedom of speech. And so we'll still having this conversation with Mr. Felix Morka. Just before that break, you were talking about the president bringing in people who are competent, people who have the capacity to do the job. But there are people who also say that the failure of past administration, and maybe perhaps this one, to imbibe the democratic values in terms of true federalism and then federal character, has also led to some issues or roadblocks in our democracy. And I want you to speak to that. Do you agree with that?
Well, yes, I think there are valid concerns about issues of inclusiveness of those who are appointed to high offices or high political offices in the country. Yes, in a federal system that we have, it's important to ensure that every constituent part of this country has representation, has some voice in government. That's very important. But I don't think it's nearly as important as bringing people in who have the command over the responsibilities that they're given to perform the job of that office. I know that in this country we speak about nepotism and ethnic people appointing people on the basis of relationships and whether it's religious ethnic relationships. That's a problem because of the nature of our country and because of our history. People feel that if a minister is appointed, no matter how terrible that minister is, as long as the minister is from their part of the country or is in a part of their own religious faith, then it's okay. That may be okay for you because you feel like your person, somebody from your part, is there. But when I'm not from your part, all I want to see is good governance. I want to see good quality service. And sometimes you can actually achieve both. You can have this sort of inclusive representation in government without necessarily sacrificing merit. Because I'm sure that in every part of this country, for whatever portfolio, if you look really hard, you can find somebody from that part who has some minimum competence to perform in that office. But what I find disturbing is the idea that a minister is appointed or somebody is appointed into office, and because it's from a part of the country, people celebrate him or her, even when they are totally violating their oath of office, even when they are violently breaching, the public trusts. People still celebrate them just because they're from that part of the country. Like somebody said, a friend said, he says, look, it's like my teeth is better than your own. So if this individual is accused or is found to have, stolen public, funds, people still come out, to defend them and say, oh, you're saying this because he's from my part of the country. What has that got to do with it? If you are guilty of, acts of corruption, you should be held accountable, irrespective of where you come from, irrespective of your place of worship.
So
as far as I'm concerned.
What then would you say is responsible for the outcry of disenfranchisement? People say, in the north, people say they're disenfranchised. In the south, people say they're disenfranchised. Even in the west and the east, there's this cry about disenfranchisement. What would you say is responsible for that then, if it's not the issue of federal character?
No, you see, you must also distinguish between the outcry by the elites and the outcry by the ordinary people. Now, poverty has no tribal marks. Poverty has no ethnicity in this country. An Igbo man who is poor and who is hungry is as poor and as hungry as the Hausa man, and as poor and hungry as the Yoruba man, or from any other minority ethnic group in this country. So when you hear Nigerians who are living with poverty, when they speak or when you hear their outcry, you hear virtually the same thing, because they are the excluded majority, the social and economically excluded majority in this country. So when they speak and when they cry, their cry is the same. I hear the same thing. But when the elites cry, they cry sometimes a very selfish, self-interested kind of cry. They cry based on their own perception of what, their sense of entitlement is. Oh, that portfolio of government should have come to the east. He says that because, maybe he himself feels entitled to that position, or knows someone, or will feel better if somebody from his part of the country is in that position because, that somehow guarantees some level of access to government, by that appointment. The point I'm making is that I am more concerned about how appointments and the business of governance affects the ordinary Nigerians. Yes, people have the freedom to aspire to, leadership. But when you eventually find yourself in a position to lead or to serve, which is really a better way to put it, you must serve, selflessly. You must be seen to serve with the, utmost regard for the well-being of the most vulnerable.
But you also think that you talk about this evangelism is elitist.
That's my point. That's what I'm saying. That, the bulk of the argument is really about elites who make these claims and counterclaims and who are in this perpetual business of, competing for, for government patronage. And when they don't get it, you see somebody is, you've seen cases where some political, people have even taken action that is inimical to their own community. Sometimes sabotage their own community in order to underscore their argument that they need to be included in government. So you see that. So my point is that, we must be careful to not unnecessarily enlarge the importance of some of the elitist, arguments. And by the way, I'm not saying anything about, whether the government itself is being all or totally, equitable in appointments. And I think that the government needs to be equitable. But I am trying to emphasize the point that in being equitable, in making sure that everybody is included, that we must not sacrifice merit, in favor of mediocrity by bringing people from certain parts of the country or religion only to find that they do not have, even the basic, competence to perform in that office. Because when they fail to perform, millions, hundreds of millions of Nigerians suffer, by their failure to do, their job. And the other point we must not also forget is that beyond the issue of getting the right people in the right places and making sure that they actually have the capacity to perform, I think that we must also go through a process of, reorientation about our own attitude as a people, the collective of Nigerians. We must all really take a deep breath and think about who we are and how we express our citizenship. I always believe that Nigerians are like a people who are absent from their home. We're here, but we're not here. We make a lot of noise and we're very abusive to each other and to people, in authority, and those in authority berate those who are beneath them. But even, interpersonal relationships have deteriorated socially in this country. I was in Abuja just a couple of days ago and went into a Chinese restaurant, about 8 o'clock to order some takeout. I ordered that and ordered, with my menu with some soup to go with it. And I got back to my hotel only to find that the soup was not packed in the bag I was given. And I called the restaurant to say, look, I paid for this thing and I don't see it. And the fellow was like, oh really? Let me check. He came back on the phone and says, oh yes, the thing is here. We didn't pack it. I'm like, well, how do I get it now? I'm already at my hotel. You know what he said to me? He says, please calm down. I said it just as I'm saying it to you. And he says, calm down. This is a man who failed to do his job, who had, failed to give me the service I paid for, the food I paid for. He didn't give it to me. But he is the first to tell me to calm down. You see, businesses, actually, quite frankly, some of the big retailers in this country, I don't know how they manage. Because you spend money, you create a business vision, you create the products and you hire people. You create employment for them. But then they take those positions and the man or woman who is at the till, attending to you, sees you almost as somebody who is disturbing their peace when you come forward to make a payment for your items. At a very basic level, Nigerians have really grown in their, in the rudeness and in this terrible attitude. My point is that it's not only about government. We must also look at, our own selves, in our own private lives, in our own social interactions, in our day-to-day engagements with, other citizens. There's been a major breakdown of, our moral fabric, and we need to mend it urgently. Because, what you see at the governance level is a reflection of what you see in society. The police, the attitude of the police in the streets, how they think they are unaccountable. Because they see those who are higher in office demonstrate brutal, disregard for accountability and respect for basic, fundamental rights. So they too think they can, exercise the same authority in their own little sphere. So we need to, so it's a systemic problem that we need to begin to address. And I hope that, this government will begin by, first of all, getting it right, by having the right people in the right places, very quickly, so that the government can begin to function. And my call today is that we as a people must also see ourselves, as government. We must see ourselves and our attitudes and our thinking as partners in government. Because without us, there's no government. And if we don't have a government, then we might as well abolish our democracy and return to, the whole state of nature. And where, might is right and, the brute of force, rules. But we can't go back. We can't go back to anything that is not respectful of the dignity of, our people. We must consolidate. We must, show respect to our people by serving them the way they deserve to be served.
Now, looking at, let's talk about leadership now and the role of leadership and governance in driving our democracy right and ensuring that we get the process right. Now, looking at leadership now, do you really think that the kind of leaders understand the ideals of democracy? And if they do, why are we still having the kind of developmental challenges, or better still at this particular level in our democracy as a nation with over 50 years in existence?
Yes. Well, unfortunately, I can't say that everyone in government or who has a role in government, whether it's in the executive branch or in the legislature or even in the judicial branch, that they get it, that they get, the whole trust, and that they embody some of the values that are important in the democracy. Many don't, or at least maybe some, I don't know, don't get it. But I think that is a part of the problem, and it's a part of, the evolutionary process of our democracy. Because you must remember that at the turn of 1999, there are many eminent citizens, smart, patriotic Nigerians who will not touch the, ticket of a party to run for office. I am one of those people. But in my case, I was part of the human rights pro-democracy movement that fought for, democracy. But we made what I consider now to be a strategic mistake in 1999. That many of us, or at least some of us, did not push further into, running for office at the time. Now, many of those who pushed forward to run for office in 1999 were not necessarily people who were involved in the struggle to remove the military, or who had any yearning to serve the people. Many of them, quite frankly, were people who were also in business with the military, dictatorship, who had the money, who had the access, and who had the audacity to jump in. They jumped in, and they were elected. And lo and behold, the democracy we thought may be disrupted has cohered, has, continued undisturbed. So they were the frontline people who took power. They've taken power now, and they've kept power. And with their political power, they have also deepened their economic power. And with their economic power, they are consolidating their political power. And now, those who are well-meaning, who also want to come in and play a role and make a contribution, are struggling, don't have that access to do that. So my point is that...
How do we fix it from here, quickly, because of our time? How do we fix it?
No, we must now, that's my point, that we must now begin to get more and more interested in that process. Every Nigerian now has a responsibility to look in that direction, to actually figure out a role for themselves. You're doing your piece, sitting here doing your job. Everybody else must do their job. And if you are inspired, please go forward in the political process. Go compete, because the more real people who are knocking on the political doors, who are in these parties seeking opportunities to lead and to serve and to govern, to be elected into office, the better for this country. I think that ultimately the good must, completely, drown the bad in the system. And we must provide every opportunity and facility for good Nigerians to find their way into, these very sensitive positions in government.
We could go on with this conversation with you, Mr. Felix Morka. It's been a very interesting conversation. Thank you so much for doing justice to this. And I'm very sure Nigerians have learned a lot, as much as we have sitting with you here in the studio. But we do have to wrap up on this segment. Many thanks to you for coming on the program.
Thanks for having me.
We'll be speaking with Mr. Felix Morka, who is the Executive Director of Social and Economic Rights Action Center, SERAC. We've been talking about getting our democratic process right, but that's where we end this conversation. We'll take a break now, and up next we will have Principal Oveso and the crew. We're talking sports on SUPERDAWN. Do stay with us.